You are listening to Crazy HOA Moments. I wish this was exaggerated. Sandra Gray stood in my driveway, hood up against the gray sky, pointing at the patch of ice near my mailbox post and shouting that my sidewalk was a hazard and she would file a violation and call the HOA vendor immediately. "Smile. I am documenting this for the file," she said, holding her bright phone case like a badge while she aimed her camera at my front steps. I had just pulled in from my shift at the restaurant, still wearing my navy puffer jacket, and I was holding my portable battery pack because my phone had died on the drive home. She took 3 more photos, then waved a snow emergency door hanger at me like it was a weapon. No readable text visible, but I knew what it said because she had taped one to my front door 2 days earlier. "I am calling the tow vendor right now," Sandra said. "Your vehicle is parked in violation of the snow emergency zone designation and the association has the authority to remove it." I looked at my truck, which was parked in my own driveway, not blocking anything, and I tried to keep my voice steady. "This is my driveway," I said. She smiled and tapped her phone case against her palm. "The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I," she said. I looked past her and saw a golf cart with chains on the tires idling at the end of my driveway, the same cart the Mesa Verde Landing Association used for snow patrols. Santa Rosa, California does not get heavy snow every winter, but this year we had 3 storms in 2 weeks and the HOA turned into a war zone. I work nights managing a restaurant, long evening shifts that end after midnight, and I had been shoveling my walk every morning before I crashed. But Sandra claimed I was missing deadlines, and the HOA had invented a strict window after snowfall when sidewalks had to be cleared or you faced immediate fines. She was the treasurer, and she weaponized fees like they were personal insults. The conflict started a week earlier when I left my winter wreath up 1 week too long, a simple greenery circle with red ribbon, and Sandra escalated it into a full violation. She filed a formal complaint, then used the wreath as proof I was a repeat offender when the next snow hit. "Keep arguing, you are making my case for me," Sandra said, and she turned and walked back to the golf cart. I went inside and checked my doorbell video. The camera had captured her exact words, her tone, and the moment she placed a violation sticker on my truck window. I saved the clip to my cloud account and made a note of the timestamp. I kept my phone in my pocket because I was saving one clip for the finale. The stakes were real. I was trying to keep my home insurance stable, and the HOA was pushing me toward a claim. If they filed a lien or reported the property as non-compliant, my insurer could raise my rate or drop me entirely. 2 days later, I got a notice in my mailbox claiming I had missed a hearing I was never told about. The letter was dated 3 days earlier, but the postmark showed it was mailed the morning of the supposed hearing. Sandra had signed it as treasurer, and the letter stated that the board had voted to assess a $200 fine for ice hazard non-compliance and an additional $50 for the wreath. I took photos of the envelope, the postmark, and the letter. Then I called the management company. The woman on the phone said the hearing was recorded in the minutes and I should have received notice. I told her I had no notice, and she said she would check the mailing log. She called me back an hour later and said the log showed the notice was sent, but she could not provide proof of delivery. I drove to the management company office the next morning and asked for a copy of the mailing log. The receptionist said I needed to submit a written request, and it could take up to 10 business days. I submitted the request on the spot, then I asked to see the board meeting minutes. She handed me a printed copy, and I scanned the page. The minutes listed my name, the violation, and the vote, but there was no mention of notice being sent or any confirmation that I had been contacted. I took a photo of the minutes and left. That afternoon, Sandra called my phone. I did not answer, but she left a voicemail. "Your appeal window has closed," she said. "If you do not pay the fines by Friday, we will add a lien processing fee and refer the matter to our attorney." I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to my own email as a backup. I also reached out to my mail carrier, a guy named Dennis who had been delivering on my route for 6 years. Dennis was my ally. He had seen Sandra posting notices repeatedly, sometimes multiple times in one day, and he had started making notes in his own log because he thought it was harassment. Dennis told me he had delivered 2 notices to my address in the past week, both from the HOA, but he had never seen a notice about a hearing. He also said Sandra had been riding the snow patrol cart almost every day, stopping at homes and taking photos. He offered to write a statement if I needed it, and I told him I would take him up on that. I went home and reviewed my doorbell footage from the past 2 weeks. I found multiple clips of Sandra approaching my property, taking photos and placing stickers on my vehicle. In one clip, she was clearly standing on my front steps, leaning in close to the camera and whispering something I could not make out. I downloaded every clip and organized them by date. The HOA claimed sidewalks had to be cleared within 12 hours of snowfall ending, and the clock was running every time the weather changed. The pressure was constant. If I worked a closing shift and got home at 1 in the morning, I had to shovel before noon or risk another fine. Sandra knew my schedule because she had asked my neighbors, and she timed her patrols to catch me when I was asleep or at work. The neighborhood was a place where deadlines changed depending on who was being targeted, and I was the current target. On Thursday, I got another notice. This one was taped to my front door, and it stated that my vehicle was parked in a snow emergency zone and would be towed within 24 hours if I did not move it. My truck was in my driveway, same spot as always, and there was no snow emergency declared by the city. I called the Santa Rosa Public Works Department and confirmed that no emergency parking restrictions were in effect. I took a photo of the notice, then I called the HOA tow vendor directly. The dispatcher said they had no active tow order for my address, and they would not tow a vehicle from a private driveway without proof of violation. I asked her to note my call in their system, and she agreed. That night, I was closing the restaurant when my neighbor texted me. She said Sandra was in my driveway again, taking photos and talking on her phone. I checked my doorbell camera from my phone and saw Sandra standing beside my truck, holding her phone case like a badge and gesturing at the vehicle. I saved the clip and sent a text to Dennis asking if he could swing by my street the next morning and document anything unusual. He replied that he would. Friday morning, I woke up to find a tow truck idling in front of my house. I pulled on my jacket and went outside. The tow driver was a young guy, maybe late 20s, and he was looking at a work order on his tablet. I walked up and asked what was going on. He said he had an order to tow my vehicle for snow emergency violation. I told him there was no snow emergency, and he frowned. He checked his tablet again, then he said the order came from the HOA and included a reference number. I asked to see the order, and he showed me the screen. The reference number matched the notice Sandra had taped to my door. I pulled out my phone and showed him the email from the city confirming no emergency restrictions. He hesitated, then he said he would call his dispatch. While he was on the phone, Sandra appeared, walking fast from the direction of the golf cart. She was holding her phone case high and smiling. "The tow is authorized," she said. "The association has the right to enforce parking compliance." The driver looked at her, then at me, then back at his phone. His dispatch told him to stand down unless he had city authorization, and he said he did not. Sandra insisted the tow was authorized, and the tow driver hesitated, but he finally shook his head and said he was not going to tow without city paperwork. Sandra yelled that she would report him to his company, and he shrugged and drove away. Sandra turned to me and said I had just made everything worse. She walked back to the golf cart and drove off. I went inside and called an attorney. The lawyer listened to my story, reviewed the photos and videos I sent, and told me I had a strong case for harassment and improper process. She said the HOA was required to provide proper notice for hearings and could not assess fines without giving me a chance to respond. She also said the tow attempt could be considered harassment if the city had no emergency order in place. She offered to send a letter to the management company demanding they void the fines and stop the enforcement actions. I agreed, and she sent the letter that afternoon. The HOA did not respond to the letter. Instead, they scheduled a surprise hearing for the following Tuesday and sent me a notice on Saturday, giving me less than 3 business days. The notice said the hearing was mandatory and failure to attend would result in automatic lien filing. I forwarded the notice to my attorney, and she told me to attend and record everything. I also asked Dennis to write his statement, and he sent me a signed letter describing the repeated notice deliveries and Sandra's daily patrols. I printed the letter and added it to my evidence folder. Tuesday arrived and I drove to the management company office. The lobby was small, just a waiting area with a few chairs and a reception desk. Sandra was already there, sitting in one of the chairs with a thick binder on her lap. She looked up when I walked in and smiled. "You are late," she said. The hearing started 5 minutes ago. I checked my watch. I was exactly on time. The receptionist told me to go into the conference room, and I followed her down a short hallway. Inside the conference room, 3 board members were sitting at a long table. Sandra took a seat at the end, and I sat across from them. The board president, an older man with gray hair, opened the meeting by saying they were here to address my repeated violations and my refusal to comply with snow emergency protocols. I started to speak, but he held up his hand. "We are not here to debate," he said. "We are here to inform you of the board's decision." I pulled out my phone and set it on the table, recording light visible but screen turned away. The president frowned. "You cannot record this meeting," he said. I told him California is a two-party consent state for private conversations, but HOA meetings are subject to member access, and I had the right to document the proceedings. He looked at Sandra, and she whispered something to him. He sighed and said I could record, but I was not allowed to speak out of turn. I nodded and let him continue. He read from a prepared statement claiming I had failed to clear my sidewalk within the required window on 3 separate occasions, failed to remove holiday decorations in a timely manner, and obstructed HOA enforcement by interfering with a tow vendor. He said the board had voted to assess a total of $500 in fines and would file a lien if I did not pay within 10 days. I waited until he finished, then I asked if I could respond. He said I had 2 minutes. I pulled out my evidence folder and handed him a copy of the city email confirming no snow emergency. I also handed him Dennis's signed statement and a printed timeline of every notice I had received, including photos of postmarks and delivery dates. I explained that I had never received notice of the first hearing, and the second hearing notice gave me less than the required time to prepare. I also said the tow attempt was illegal because there was no city authorization and the driver had confirmed it. Sandra leaned forward and said the association did not need city authorization because the rules allowed the board to enforce parking compliance on private property. I looked at her and said the tow vendor disagreed, and they had refused to proceed. She said that was irrelevant because I had already violated the rules by failing to move my vehicle when ordered. I asked her to show me the rule that required me to move my vehicle from my own driveway during a non-existent snow emergency. She flipped through her binder and pulled out a highlighted page. She read the section aloud, and it said the board could designate temporary parking restrictions during snow removal operations. I asked if the board had officially designated my driveway as a restricted zone, and if so, when and how was I notified? She said the designation was implicit because the snow emergency door hanger had been posted. I asked to see the board resolution authorizing the designation. She did not have one. The board president said they would take my evidence under advisement and vote again at the next meeting. I said that was not acceptable because they were required to provide me a fair hearing before assessing fines, and this meeting was the first time I had been allowed to present evidence. He said the meeting was over and I needed to leave. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, smash that like button and subscribe for more winter payback stories. I stood up and said I would be filing a complaint with the management company and consulting with my attorney about next steps. Sandra laughed and said, "Keep arguing. You are making my case for me." I walked out of the conference room and went straight to the receptionist. I asked for a copy of the meeting minutes once they were finalized, and she said they would be posted online within a week. I left the building and sat in my truck for a minute, reviewing my recording. Everything was clear, including Sandra's admission that there was no board resolution. That evening, my attorney called. She had received a response from the management company, and they were refusing to void the fines. They claimed the board had the authority to assess penalties for violations, and my appeal had been heard and denied. My attorney said we could file a lawsuit, but it would take months and cost thousands. She suggested I try one more approach first. She told me to request the HOA financial records and look for any pattern of selective enforcement or missing funds. If Sandra was weaponizing fees, there might be evidence in the books. I submitted a formal records request the next day, asking for all financial records related to fines, liens, and vendor payments for the past 2 years. The management company responded that they would provide the records within 30 days. I also filed a complaint with the California Department of Real Estate, alleging improper notice and selective enforcement. The DRE said they would investigate, but it could take several months. I knew I needed faster results, so I started digging into public records. I found the HOA's tax filings and budget reports online, and I started comparing the numbers. The numbers did not match. The budget showed total fine revenue of $12,000 for the previous year, but the tax filing showed only $8,000. I flagged the discrepancy and kept looking. I found vendor payment records that listed the tow company, and the amounts were inconsistent. Some months showed no payments, and other months showed double payments. I also found a line item for snow removal services that totaled $15,000, but there was no detail about which vendor or how the money was spent. I made copies of everything and sent them to my attorney. She called me back within an hour. She said the discrepancies were significant and could indicate embezzlement or mismanagement. She recommended I bring the records to the next board meeting and ask for an explanation. She also said I should request an independent audit. I agreed, and I started preparing a presentation. I organized the documents into a clear timeline, highlighting every inconsistency and every missing record. I also included the doorbell footage, Dennis's statement, and the tow driver's refusal. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. I arrived early and sat in the front row. Sandra was already there, sitting at the board table with her binder open. She looked at me and smiled. I ignored her and set up my phone to record. The meeting started with routine business, approving the minutes from the last meeting and discussing landscaping bids. Then the president opened the floor for homeowner comments. I stood up and said I had evidence of financial irregularities and selective enforcement, and I wanted to present it to the board. Sandra interrupted and said I was out of order because I had not submitted a request to speak in advance. The president agreed and said I would have to wait until the next meeting. I said the evidence was time-sensitive and involved potential misuse of HOA funds. He hesitated. Then he said I could have 3 minutes. I walked to the front of the room and handed each board member a copy of my presentation. I also projected the documents on the screen using my phone and a portable projector I had borrowed from the restaurant. I walked them through the discrepancies, pointing out the missing $4,000 in fine revenue and the unexplained snow removal payments. I also showed them the vendor payment records and asked why the tow company was being paid in some months but not others, despite Sandra's claim that enforcement was consistent. I finished by showing the doorbell footage of Sandra's repeated visits and her statement that the tow was authorized. I said the footage proved she was targeting me specifically, and the financial records suggested she might be using enforcement as a way to generate revenue for personal benefit. Sandra stood up and shouted that I was slandering her and she would sue me for defamation. I said I was presenting public records and asking questions, and if she had an explanation, I was happy to hear it. She said the financial records were none of my business, and I had no right to question the board's decisions. I said the records were my business because I was a homeowner, and I had a right to know how my dues were being spent. The president called for order and said he would review the evidence and schedule a special meeting to address my concerns. I sat down and waited for the rest of the meeting to finish. After it ended, several other homeowners came up to me and said they had also been targeted by Sandra and they wanted to help. One woman said Sandra had filed a lien against her for a late fee that was never properly noticed, and she had paid it because she could not afford to fight. Another man said Sandra had threatened to tow his car during a snowstorm, even though he had proof he was out of town. I took their contact information and told them my attorney might reach out. The special meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and it was held at the management company office. This time, the lobby was packed. At least 15 homeowners showed up, and they all had stories about Sandra's enforcement tactics. The management company brought in their attorney, and the board president opened the meeting by saying they had reviewed the financial records and found no evidence of wrongdoing. I asked if they had conducted an independent audit, and he said they had not. I said I was requesting an audit, and several other homeowners said they supported the request. Sandra stood up and said an audit was unnecessary and expensive, and it would only delay important work. I said the HOA had a legal obligation to maintain accurate records, and the discrepancies I had found raised serious questions. The management company attorney said the board could vote on whether to authorize an audit, and the president called for a vote. 2 board members voted yes, and Sandra voted no. The president abstained, and the motion passed. Sandra slammed her binder shut and said she was resigning from the board effective immediately. The president accepted her resignation, and the meeting continued. The board voted to hire an independent auditor and to suspend all enforcement actions until the audit was complete. They also voted to void my fines and remove the lien threat from my account. I asked if they would publish the audit results, and the president said they would. I also asked if they would establish clear standards and timelines for enforcement, and he said they would work with the management company to draft new policies. After the meeting, the management company attorney pulled me aside and said Sandra had made a serious mistake by trying to enforce rules without proper board authority. He said the tow attempt and the selective enforcement could expose the HOA to liability, and they were going to review all of her actions as treasurer. He also said the financial discrepancies were concerning, and if the audit found evidence of fraud, they would report it to law enforcement. I thanked him and left. 2 weeks later, the audit was complete. The auditor found that Sandra had been diverting fine payments into a separate account and using the money to pay for personal expenses, including snow removal for her own property. The total amount was over $6,000. The board filed a police report and Sandra was charged with embezzlement. The HOA also filed a civil lawsuit to recover the funds. My attorney helped me file a separate claim for harassment and emotional distress, and the HOA settled for $5,000 plus attorney fees. The board also implemented new policies requiring all enforcement actions to be approved by a majority vote and all fines to be noticed with proof of delivery. They published the standards and timelines to all homeowners in a special mailing, and they hired a new management company to oversee compliance. Sandra was removed as meeting chair and lost the microphone control, and the board elected a new treasurer who had no history of selective enforcement. The final showdown happened at a public meeting moment where the minutes turned against Karen. The new board president read the audit summary aloud, including the finding that Sandra had targeted specific homeowners based on personal grudges and had falsified records to justify enforcement actions. He also read a statement from the tow vendor confirming they had refused multiple tow requests from Sandra because she could not provide proper authorization. The room was silent, and then one homeowner stood up and clapped. Others joined in, and the applause lasted for over a minute. I left the meeting feeling like I could finally breathe. The HOA had been forced to publish standards and timelines to all homeowners, and the new board was committed to fair enforcement. My home insurance stayed stable, and I never received another violation notice. Dennis continued to deliver my mail, and he told me Sandra had moved out of the neighborhood 2 months after the criminal charges were filed. The golf cart with chains on the tires was retired, and the new board switched to a professional snow removal service that worked on a clear schedule with posted notices. The funny karma moment came a few weeks later when I ran into the tow driver at a gas station. He recognized me and laughed. He said his company had dropped the HOA contract after Sandra kept calling with fake emergencies, and they had flagged her account as a liability risk. He also said the dispatcher had saved my call as evidence when the HOA tried to claim the driver had refused a valid order. I thanked him and told him his refusal had probably saved me thousands in legal fees. He shrugged and said he was just doing his job, but he was glad it worked out. I kept the doorbell footage and the financial records as backups, and I made sure every homeowner in the neighborhood knew they had the right to request records and challenge enforcement actions. The new board was not perfect, but they were accountable, and that made all the difference. The winter storms kept coming, and I kept shoveling my walk, but now I did it on my own schedule without fear of surprise violations or midnight tow threats. The Mesa Verde Landing Association learned a hard lesson about selective enforcement and financial oversight, and I learned that standing up to HOA abuse requires patience, documentation, and a willingness to fight even when the system feels rigged. The neighborhood is quieter now, and the snow patrols are gone. I still see the golf cart sometimes, parked behind the community center, chains rusting in the rain. It is a reminder that power without accountability always ends badly, and that sometimes the best revenge is just making sure the rules apply to everyone equally. I hope your day stays calm,